Every Sunday evening, Martha would prepare dinner the same way she had done for the past 30 years. The aroma of roasted chicken filled the air, the sound of plates clinking, and the gentle hum of an old radio playing soft jazz in the corner. It was her ritual, her comfort, her way of pretending that nothing had changed. But something had changed. At the center of the dining table stood 5 chairs, and one of them had been empty for 6 years. Edward's chair. Even after his death, Martha never removed it. She cleaned it, polished it, and even placed a plate in front of it, as if he might walk in any moment and take his seat again. Her children, Anna, Luke, and Nora, had stopped questioning it long ago. To them, it was just one of their mother's ways of holding on to the past. But to Martha, that empty chair wasn't just a memory, it was hope. She believed Edward still visited. Maybe not in body, but in spirit. Sometimes, she swore she could hear him humming in the hallway, or smell his favorite cologne when she passed their bedroom. It was strange, yes, but it was the only thing that kept her heart from collapsing under the weight of loneliness. That evening was no different. The table was set perfectly. 5 plates, silver spoons shining, candles flickering, and a gentle drizzle outside the window, tapping against the glass. Martha looked at the clock. 7:12 p.m. Her children were late, as always. She smiled softly to herself and whispered, "A P. You see, Edward, they'll never be on time. A P." She chuckled under her breath, half in humor, half in longing. Sometimes, she would even pour a little wine into Edward's glass, and raise her own like a toast. A P. But beneath that fragile smile, there was something heavy inside her heart, something she never spoke of. Because deep down, Martha knew the truth. No amount of Sunday dinners would ever fill the silence Edward had left behind. Still, she carried on, one Sunday at a time, because letting go felt like betraying the love that once made her world complete. She sat down, folding her hands quietly, staring at that empty chair, and whispered, "I miss you." And for just a moment, she thought she heard a faint whisper back. So soft, it could have been her imagination. Or maybe it wasn't. Just then, thunder rolled in the distance. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping faster against the window panes. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied again. Martha took a deep breath. Something about the air felt different that night. Thicker, colder, and strangely expectant, as if the house itself was holding its breath. She looked again at the empty chair, and for the briefest second, she thought she saw someone sitting there. A shadow, a figure. But when she blinked, it was gone. She shook her head, half smiling, half afraid. "You're losing your mind, old woman," she whispered to herself. But deep inside, she wasn't so sure. Outside, the rain kept falling, and the sound of a distant knock echoed softly against the old wooden door. But that was a story for the next chapter. The rain that night didn't sound normal. It wasn't the kind that gently sang against the window. No, it was fierce, wild, almost angry. The kind of rain that made even the strongest houses feel lonely. Martha looked out the window. Darkness stretched beyond her garden like an ocean of shadows. She sighed softly, rubbing her hands together for warmth. The clock struck 8. "They're late again," she murmured. "But that's nothing new." She walked toward the dining table and straightened Edward's chair, an old habit she never forgot. The candlelight flickered, dancing across the framed photo of Edward smiling from years ago. For a moment she thought the smile looked softer than before. Then it came. A knock. Soft at first. Knock, knock, knock. Martha froze. Her heart gave a little jump, not out of fear but surprise. Who could it be at this hour? The road to her house was quiet. She lived far from town. No one ever visited unannounced. She hesitated, her old hands trembling slightly as she reached for her shawl. Another knock came, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. The sound of the rain swallowed everything else, but those 3 knocks still echoed, heavy and certain. Martha walked to the door, her footsteps slow and cautious. Yes, yes, I'm coming, she whispered, trying to sound braver than she felt. When she opened the door, cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. And there, standing in the rain, was a man. Tall, perhaps in his 40s. His coat drenched, his eyes kind, but strange. He didn't look like a beggar. Didn't look dangerous, either. He simply stood there, calm, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said softly, his voice deep and steady. I was invited to dinner." Martha blinked, confused. "Invited?" she asked. "By whom?" The man gave a small, tired smile. "By Edward," he said. "He told me to come." The name hit her like a wave. For a second, she couldn't breathe. The room behind her seemed to tilt, her heart pounding, her mind racing. "Edward?" she whispered. "My husband? You must be mistaken. He's been gone for years." The man nodded gently, almost like he'd expected that. "Yes, I know." There was silence. The kind that wraps itself around you until you can hear your own heartbeat. Martha didn't move. She wanted to shut the door, and yet she couldn't. The stranger's eyes held something, not fear, not pity, but familiarity. Like he'd seen her before. Like he knew her. "You should come in," she said finally, her voice trembling. "You'll catch your death out there." The man smiled faintly. "Thank you, Mrs. Hale." She froze again. How do you know my name?" He looked at her gently. "Edward told me. He said you'd be kind." For a moment, Martha felt the whole world narrow to a whisper. She stepped back slowly, letting him in. The door closed with a soft creak, sealing the storm outside, but inviting another one in. As the man stepped inside, water dripped from his coat onto the wooden floor. He glanced around, his eyes resting on the empty chair at the dinner table. And then he said quietly, almost to himself, "I see he still has his place." Martha's breath caught. "You knew about that chair?" He smiled again, faintly. "Edward told me everything." Martha's mind spun with questions. Who was this man? Why did he know her husband's name? And why did he sound so sure? But before she could ask, another sound echoed. The front door opening. Her children had finally arrived. 3 voices, laughter mixed with the rush of umbrellas and wet shoes. "Mom, sorry we're late. The rain's terrible." They stopped when they saw the stranger standing beside their mother. The air grew thick. Martha tried to speak, to explain, but her voice trembled. "This is, Mr.?" The man interrupted gently, smiling toward them. "Michael. My name is Michael. Your father invited me." Luke frowned. Anna exchanged a look with Nora. "Our father?" Luke said coldly. "You mean Edward Hale? He's dead." Michael's expression didn't change. He simply nodded. "Yes," he said softly. "But promises don't die with people, do they?" The room fell silent again, and outside, thunder rolled across the dark sky. No one moved. No one spoke. Because somehow, in that moment, everyone felt that Edward's presence had returned home. The sound of rain faded into the background, but the silence inside the house It grew heavier. No one spoke. Only the faint tick-tick of the old wall clock dared to break the stillness. Michael stood quietly, his hands folded, a faint smile on his face. Polite, calm, yet unsettling in some way that none of them could explain. Martha cleared her throat softly. "Michael was invited by your father," she said, her voice uncertain, like she herself didn't believe the words she was saying. Anna looked confused. Luke frowned. Nora, the youngest, just stared curiously, trying to read this stranger's eyes. He didn't look dangerous. He didn't even look lost. He looked like he belonged there. "Invited by Dad?" Luke said, folding his arms. "That's impossible. Our father's been gone for 6 years." Michael's smile didn't fade. "Yes," he said quietly. "He told me that too." The way he said it, calm, steady, sent a chill through the room. Martha forced a small, nervous laugh. "It's just a misunderstanding, I'm sure. You must be hungry. Please, sit down." She gestured toward the table, the same table she'd been setting for decades. Michael hesitated for only a second before he walked toward it, and then he sat down. In Edward's chair, the air shifted instantly, like something invisible had just moved through the room. Anna gasped softly. Luke's jaw tightened. Even Nora's smile faded. No one had ever dared sit in that chair since the day Edward died. No one, not even the children. But Martha didn't say anything. She just stood there, frozen, staring at him. For some reason, she couldn't bring herself to ask him to move. Michael placed his hands on the table gently, glancing around as if soaking in the warmth of the family photos on the walls. "It's been a while since I sat here," he said quietly. Martha blinked. "You've been here before?" He looked at her for a long moment before replying. "In a way," he said. "Not like this. But yes, I've been here." Luke leaned forward, frustrated. "Listen, mister. Who are you, really? Some old friend of Dad's? Some kind of trick?" Michael's eyes met his, calm, steady, unshaken. "Your father helped me once," he said, "long ago. He saved me when I had nowhere to go. And now, I'm here to keep a promise." "What promise?" Nora asked softly. Michael looked at her, his gaze so gentle that it almost made her heart ache. "A promise to make sure his family remembers what love feels like, even when he's gone." The words hung in the air like mist. No one moved. No one breathed. Then slowly, Martha sat down. She didn't understand this man, didn't know if she should believe him. But something about his voice, his calmness, the way he spoke of Edward, felt real. Too real to ignore. Dinner began quietly. The sound of plates, spoons, and rain blended into an uneasy harmony. No one spoke much. Only Michael occasionally broke the silence, not with questions, but with memories. He spoke about Edward's laughter, his favorite jokes, his dislike for sugar in tea. He remembered the way Edward used to hum before sleeping, and how he once carved a little E+M on the old tree outside the garden gate. Martha's eyes widened. She'd never told anyone about that, not even the children. Luke noticed her expression. "Mom, he's lying, right?" Martha's lips trembled. "No, he's not. Edward really did that." Michael smiled faintly. "He said you were angry that day because the carving spoiled your favorite tree." Her breath caught. That was true. How could he possibly know? Nora whispered almost to herself, "Maybe he's telling the truth." Luke scoffed. "Or maybe he's a good liar." But deep down, even Luke felt something he couldn't explain. A strange warmth, a familiarity, a calm presence that reminded him of nights when his father would sit right there, in that very chair, and tell him stories about never giving up. As dinner went on, The tension slowly softened. Michael didn't talk much about himself. Every word, every gesture, somehow circled back to Edward, as if he'd come carrying a piece of him. By the time they finished eating, Martha felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Stillness, not born of loneliness, but of quiet company. But beneath that peace, 100 questions still stirred. Who was Michael, really? How did he know so much? And why, when she looked into his eyes, did she feel like Edward was right there? As the candles burned low and the rain softened outside, Martha looked at the chair, and for a fleeting second, she didn't see a stranger sitting there. She saw her husband. She blinked, and Michael smiled, as if he somehow knew. That night, after dinner, the house felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just different. Like someone had quietly opened a door to the past, and all the memories that had been sleeping inside suddenly woke up. Martha couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the rain outside tapping gently on the window like soft whispers. Beside her, the empty side of the bed felt heavier than ever. She hadn't felt that space so strongly since Edward's funeral. Downstairs, she could hear faint footsteps. Slow, careful. Michael. He hadn't left after dinner. He'd offered to help clean up, and when she told him to rest, he said quietly, "I'll just stay for a while. It feels peaceful here." Now, in the silence of midnight, he was still there, pacing, moving around as if searching for something. Martha wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and walked downstairs. The living room glowed faintly from the fireplace, and there he was, standing near the old piano. The same piano Edward used to play on cold nights when power would go out and they'd all gather with candles, humming together. Michael's fingers brushed across the keys softly. He didn't play, but the way he touched the piano, it was as if he remembered how it sounded. Martha hesitated by the stairs. "You play?" she asked softly. Michael turned, startled, then smiled gently. "Your husband tried to teach me once. I wasn't very good." The words hit her like a wave. "He taught you?" she whispered. "When?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he walked toward the fireplace and looked at the framed photo on the mantel. A picture of Edward holding baby Nora. "He had kind eyes," Michael said, "and a heart that never stopped forgiving." Martha's throat tightened. "You really knew him, didn't you?" Michael nodded slowly. "Better than most." For a long moment, they both stood there in silence, only the sound of crackling fire between them. Then Martha said quietly, "He used to say that one day, even if he wasn't around, someone would come to remind us to keep believing in goodness." Michael turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Then maybe that's why I'm here." The words lingered in the air, so gentle and yet so heavy that Martha didn't know whether to smile or cry. But upstairs, someone wasn't sleeping either. Luke sat at his window, staring at the rain, his mind racing. He'd spent the evening thinking about Michael, about the way the man talked, his calm tone, the way he knew things no outsider should know. Something didn't add up. He picked up his phone and typed Michael's name into a search bar. Nothing. No records. No social media. Not even a trace. The next morning, while Martha prepared breakfast, Luke stepped outside to check the mailbox. But what he found instead wasn't mail. It was an envelope, old, yellowed, and tucked between the door and the frame. His name, written on it, in his father's handwriting. He froze. Hands trembling, he opened it slowly. Inside, a folded note, only one line written on it. "When he returns, listen to him. He will help you find what you've lost. Dad." Luke's heart skipped a beat. He turned toward the house slowly, and through the window, he saw Michael sitting at the table with a cup of tea, smiling faintly, as if he already knew about the letter. Luke's breath caught. He whispered to himself, "Who are you?" Inside, Michael looked out the window. Their eyes met for a second, and in that quiet, for just a heartbeat, Luke saw something in Michael's face. Something hauntingly familiar. Something that made his chest tighten, like looking at an echo of his father. He blinked, and it was gone. The next few days, strange things started happening around the house. The old clock in the hallway, broken for years, suddenly started ticking again. The garden lights, disconnected since the storm, flickered to life one evening. And one morning, Martha found the missing photograph, the one of her wedding day. Placed perfectly back in its frame, cleaned, polished, as if someone had lovingly restored it. She asked everyone in the house, nobody knew. But when she looked at Michael, he just smiled softly and said, "Sometimes the past finds its own way home." That night, Martha finally said it out loud. "You're not just here by chance, are you?" Michael met her eyes. There was a sadness there, and something else, something almost divine. "No," he said quietly. "But I promised your husband I'd come, when it was time." Martha's lips parted. "Time for what?" Michael looked toward the family portrait on the wall, the one that still had Edward's faint reflection in the glass. "To remind you that love never leaves a house. People do, but love stays." And for the first time in years, Martha wept. Not from grief, but from a feeling she'd forgotten. Hope. Period. The morning after that emotional night, the house seemed quieter than usual. Not silent, just listening. As if the walls themselves were waiting for something to be said or remembered. Martha moved slowly through the kitchen, her eyes still red from the tears she had shed. The sunlight filtered through the curtains in thin golden lines, dust floating gently in the air. Michael sat at the table, a small smile on his face, staring into his cup of tea. "You didn't sleep either, did you?" Martha asked softly. He looked up. "Some nights are not meant for sleeping," he said. "They're meant for remembering." That word, remembering, echoed in her heart like a whisper she couldn't quite place. She sat across from him. "You said last night, you promised my husband, you'd come. What did you mean?" "We met during a storm," he said quietly. "He helped me when no one else would." That's the kind of man he was. He never turned away from a stranger. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The clock ticked softly, marking each heartbeat in the room. Just then, Luke entered the kitchen. His eyes went straight to Michael, suspicion still shadowing his expression. "You keep saying you knew my father," Luke said, folding his arms. "But how come we've never heard of you?" Michael looked at him calmly. "Some friendships aren't made for stories, Luke. They're made for moments." Luke scoffed. "That sounds like something out of a movie." Michael smiled faintly. "Maybe, but sometimes movies get it right." He stood, took his jacket, and walked outside, to the garden. Martha followed him with her eyes, worry and wonder blending in her gaze. Outside, the garden had changed since he came. The flowers that hadn't bloomed in months had started to open again. It was strange, almost miraculous, but nobody talked about it. Michael kneeled beside the old rose bush, brushing away dried leaves. Beneath them he found something, a small wooden box, half buried in soil. He opened it gently. Inside was an old letter, sealed in wax. The edges were faded, but the name on top was clear, Martha. Michael took the box inside and placed it on the dining table. Martha gasped the moment she saw it. I buried this years ago, she whispered. After Edward passed, I couldn't bear to look at it. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. It was Edward's handwriting. She read aloud, her voice breaking with every word. My dear Martha, if ever life feels heavy and laughter leaves your home, know that I made a promise, and so did he. You'll know him when you see him. He'll carry my words when I no longer can. Martha's tears spilled freely now. Luke stood still, staring at her, then at Michael. He? Luke said slowly. Who's he? Martha looked up from the letter, her eyes wet but shining. Edward mentioned someone once, a man he met when he was traveling for work. He said that man reminded him of an angel who'd lost his wings. The words hung in the air like fog. Luke frowned. So what are you saying? He's, what, an angel? Michael's lips curved into a sad smile. No, Luke, not an angel. Just someone who keeps promises. Then he looked at the old photo on the mantel. Edward, young and full of life, smiling at the camera. He asked me to come when the world grew quiet in this house, Michael said softly, and to bring back what you lost, faith, laughter, and forgiveness. Martha reached for his hand, tears still rolling down her face. You kept your promise. Michael nodded slowly. Not yet, he said. But soon. Luke's eyes narrowed. What do you mean by that? Michael looked at him, and for a moment, Luke saw something impossible. Behind those eyes was his father's same calmness, the same warmth. It made his chest ache. You'll understand when it's time, Michael said quietly. He walked away, out into the yard, where the wind carried the scent of blooming roses. Martha watched him go, the letter still in her trembling hands, and whispered, Edward, what have you brought back into our lives? As the door closed behind Michael, Luke whispered to himself, and what if he's not here to stay? The music would rise here in the video, soft, emotional, filled with longing and mystery, leaving the viewer with one question. Who really is Michael? And what promise still remains unfulfilled? The day after the letter was found, the house didn't feel the same. Something had changed, not in the way it looked, but in the way it breathed. There was a strange calmness in the air, the kind that comes right before a storm. Martha kept that letter close to her chest, as if it were a heartbeat she could no longer hear, but still feel. Every word of Edward's handwriting was a wound that hurt beautifully, a pain she wanted to remember. But what haunted her the most was the question. How did Michael know? He hadn't been there when Edward wrote it. He hadn't even met their family, and yet he had come, just like the letter said he would. That morning, Martha stood by the window, watching Michael in the yard. He was fixing an old wooden swing Edward had built for the kids when they were young. The rope had long rotted away, but somehow, Michael managed to tie it back together. Perfectly. For a moment, it looked exactly like it had before Edward died. Martha's breath caught in her throat. It was as if time had folded back on itself. She walked outside, her voice soft. You shouldn't have done that. It's old and broken. Michael turned, smiling faintly. Some things are only broken when we stop believing they can be fixed. His words struck her deeper than she wanted to admit. There was something about the way he spoke, the quiet certainty in his tone, that reminded her too much of Edward. You talk just like him sometimes, she said quietly. Michael looked at the swing, then back at her. Maybe that's because I still hear him. She frowned. You hear him? He nodded. Not the way you think. Sometimes people don't leave, not entirely. They leave echoes behind. Echoes of their love, their regret, their unfinished promises. His gaze lingered on the letter Martha held. That promise, he said softly, was never just about laughter. It was about forgiveness. Martha looked at him, confusion filling her eyes. Forgiveness? For what? Michael didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "Tell me, Martha, did Edward ever tell you everything about that night?" Her body stiffened. What night? The storm. The one that took his life. Martha's eyes went wide. He died in an accident? Michael stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Is that what you were told, or what you chose to believe? The sound of rain began tapping lightly against the roof again, the same rhythm as the night Edward died. Martha's heartbeat quickened. What are you saying? She whispered. Michael lowered his eyes. Edward didn't just die. Martha, he made a choice that night, a choice to save someone else. Martha staggered back, gripping the edge of the table. Save someone? Who? Michael's eyes glistened. Me. For a moment the world fell silent. The ticking clock, the rain, even the air, everything froze. Martha shook her head in disbelief. That's impossible. He died miles away from here. Michael nodded slowly. Yes, he was driving to a small town, to return something that didn't belong to him. A ring. The one I had lost. Tears welled in Martha's eyes as her hands trembled. You were with him? Michael's voice broke as he spoke. I was the reason he was on that road. He saw me standing by the highway in the storm, my car broken down. He offered to help, even though he didn't know me. And when that truck came out of nowhere, he pushed me aside. His voice cracked. He took the hit that was meant for me. Martha covered her mouth as sobs escaped her. No, please stop. Michael continued, his tone full of pain and gratitude. Before he lost consciousness, he grabbed my hand and whispered, "Tell them I'll be home when they need me most." Martha collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. Now everything made sense. The letter, the promise, Michael's sudden appearance. He was the man Edward had saved. The man carrying her husband's final words. Michael knelt in front of her, his eyes full of sorrow. I kept his promise, Martha. I came back when you needed him most. She looked at him through tears. You did. But why now? After all these years? Michael took a shaky breath. Because the silence in this house had grown louder than his memory. He stood and walked toward the window. The rain outside had stopped, leaving behind a soft mist. He didn't want me to replace him, Michael said quietly. He just wanted me to remind you that love never dies, it just changes its shape. Martha's voice trembled. And what about forgiveness? Michael turned back, a faint, broken smile on his face. Forgive yourself, Martha, for letting go of him too soon. And with that, he stepped outside, leaving Martha with the letter, the rain, and the truth that had finally spoken after years of silence. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the air inside the house still felt heavy, like the walls were soaked with secrets. Martha sat alone at the dining table, Edward's letter in her trembling hands. Her eyes were swollen, her lips pale, but her thoughts wouldn't rest. Michael's words kept echoing in her head. He took the hit that was meant for me. She couldn't decide what hurt more, the truth or the years she had spent believing a lie. Upstairs, Luke couldn't sleep either. He had heard their voices earlier, his mother's crying, Michael's low confession. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the silence afterward had pulled him closer to the door. And now as he stared at the ceiling, every part of him burned with anger. His father had died, saving that man. That stranger sitting downstairs, eating their food, sitting in his father's chair, was alive because Edward wasn't. He got up, his jaw tight, and marched down the stairs. Michael was sitting near the fireplace, lost in thought. When Luke entered, his footsteps were loud and sharp against the wooden floor. "You should have never come here," Luke said coldly. Michael looked up slowly. "I understand you're upset." "Upset?" Luke's voice trembled with rage. "You think upset covers it? My father died because of you. You took everything from us." Michael stood, his eyes calm, but heavy with sorrow. "You think I don't carry that weight every day? Then why come here?" Luke shouted. "Why now? After all these years, why open the wounds again?" Michael didn't answer right away. He walked toward the mantel where Edward's photo stood. "Because promises don't fade just because people do," he said softly. "And your father's last wish wasn't just to save my life. It was to save yours." Luke frowned, confused and furious. "Save me? From what?" Michael turned to face him. "From the same silence that killed him." Luke froze. "What are you talking about?" Michael sighed deeply, his voice low. "Edward wasn't just tired the night he died. He was breaking, Luke. He felt like his family was slipping away from him, that no one saw his pain. You were too busy with college. Martha was grieving her mother. And he felt invisible." Luke's anger faltered. His throat tightened as old memories clawed their way back. His father sitting alone on the porch, waiting for someone to join him. The nights he'd say, "You never talk to me anymore, son." "He never said that," Luke whispered. "He didn't have to," Michael said gently. "He loved you too much to show how lonely he'd become." Luke took a step back, shaking his head. "No, you're twisting this. You're trying to make me feel guilty." Michael's eyes softened. "I'm trying to make you remember." Martha appeared in the doorway then, her face pale from sleeplessness. She had heard everything. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Luke, your father never blamed you. He loved you more than his own breath." Luke turned away, his anger crumbling into something else, something raw and fragile. Then why didn't he tell me? Why did he keep it all inside? Martha's tears spilled quietly. "Because he thought being strong meant being silent." Michael nodded slowly, and that silence became the cage that trapped him. "I came back because I didn't want you to inherit it." Luke looked at him, his chest heaving. The hate in his eyes had softened, not into forgiveness yet, but into understanding. He sat down on the couch, covering his face with both hands. The room went quiet, except for the soft crackle of the fire. After a long pause, Luke muttered, "You said he wanted to save me. How?" Michael stared into the flames. "By teaching you what he never could. How to let go before it's too late." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly again, distant but steady. The same kind of storm that had taken Edward away. Luke lifted his head, his voice barely a whisper. "And what about you? What do you want?" Michael smiled faintly, a tired, almost broken smile. "Just peace." For a moment, neither spoke. The firelight flickered across their faces, one shadowed by guilt, the other by redemption. Then, from somewhere deep in the house, a picture frame fell from the wall with a soft thud. They both turned toward the sound, startled, silent. It was a photo of Edward and Luke together, their arms around each other, smiling. The glass hadn't cracked, but the photo had slipped halfway out, like it wanted to be seen again. Michael looked at it and whispered, "He's still watching." And for the first time in years, Luke didn't argue. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was healing. The next morning arrived quietly. No rain, no thunder. Just a heavy, gray sky, hanging over the house like a memory that refused to fade. Martha hadn't slept. Luke hadn't either. Even the walls seemed tired, holding the weight of everything that had been said the night before. Michael was already awake, sitting in the garden. He was staring at the horizon, where the fog kissed the earth. He looked peaceful, too peaceful for someone carrying so many ghosts. From the kitchen window, Martha watched him for a long time. Something in her heart had changed. For the first time in years, she didn't just see a stranger in her home. She saw a man bound to her family by fate, by loss, and by love that wasn't even his own. She stepped outside, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The morning air was cold, but it smelled of wet earth and roses. Edward's favorite scent. "You're up early," she said softly. Michael smiled, faintly, without turning around. "Old habits. I never learned how to rest." "You speak like a man twice your age," she said with a small laugh. "Maybe I've lived more than I should have." There was a pause, a gentle, thoughtful silence. Then Martha spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. "You said Edward wanted me to forgive myself. But what if I don't know how?" Michael turned to her, his eyes calm and kind. "You start by remembering the good instead of the end." His words hit her deeply. Because ever since Edward died, she had done the opposite. She remembered the accident, the empty chair, the sound of rain that night. But she had forgotten the laughter, the small moments, the way Edward used to dance with her, in the kitchen, for no reason at all. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a locket. It was old, scratched, and slightly bent. "He had this with him that night," Michael said softly. "He asked me to give it to you when the time was right." Martha's hands shook as she took it. She opened it slowly. Inside were two tiny pictures, one of her and one of Edward holding baby Luke. The edges were faded, but the love in those faces was still alive. Martha broke down. Her tears fell onto the locket, her sobs quiet but deep, like waves hitting a shore after a long storm. "He never forgot us," she whispered. "No," Michael said. "He never did. He just waited for you to remember him the way he wanted to be remembered. With love, not sorrow." Luke had been standing at the doorway the entire time, listening. He didn't interrupt. He couldn't. He just stood there, watching his mother cry, and for the first time in years, he understood her grief. After a long silence, Martha wiped her tears and smiled faintly through them. "You've brought pieces of him back to me, Michael. I don't know how to thank you." Michael shook his head. "Don't thank me, Martha. Thank him. He led me here. I just followed." He stood, brushing the dust from his coat. "I think it's time for me to leave." Martha's heart dropped. "Leave? But you just got here." He looked at her with that same sad smile. "My part of the promise is almost done." "Almost?" she repeated. He nodded slowly. "There's still one more person who needs to listen to Edward's voice before I go." Martha frowned. "Who?" Michael's eyes drifted to the window where Luke stood frozen, watching them. Martha turned and saw her son. Michael gave a small, knowing nod. "He still blames himself. And until he forgives, neither of us can rest." Martha's lips trembled. "What if he doesn't?" Michael's gaze softened. "Then the echoes will keep repeating." He looked back toward the fog, where the sunlight was beginning to push through, and whispered, almost to himself, "Some stories don't end until everyone learns what they were meant to hear." Then he walked away into the mist, leaving Martha standing there, clutching the locket to her heart, tears falling silently, not out of pain anymore, but release. Inside, Luke turned and walked upstairs, his mind racing, his chest heavy. He knew what Michael meant. He knew what he had to do. But forgiveness wasn't something that came easy. That evening, the house felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. The ticking of the old clock echoed through every room like a heartbeat, slow and uneven. Luke sat alone in his father's study, the same place he hadn't entered since Edward's death. Dust covered the bookshelves, and the faint smell of old paper and wood polish filled the air. On the desk lay Edward's worn-out diary, still open to the last page he had written. Luke's eyes burned as he stared at his father's handwriting, strong, confident, full of life. He ran his fingers over the words as if touching them could somehow bring his father back. "I should have been there," Luke whispered to himself. "If I had just called him that night, if I hadn't argued." He couldn't finish. The guilt he'd carried for years was clawing its way back to the surface. That was when he heard it. A soft knock on the study door. He turned, expecting Martha, but it wasn't her. It was Michael. He stood there quietly, holding something small, a folded letter sealed with an old red wax mark. "Edward wanted you to have this," Michael said gently. "He wrote it the night before the accident." Luke froze. His heart started pounding so hard he could barely breathe. "Why didn't you give it earlier?" he asked, voice trembling. Michael looked down. "Because you weren't ready to listen. Until now." He placed the letter on the table and stepped back. "I'll wait outside," he said softly, and left Luke alone with the last words of his father. For a long time, Luke just stared at the letter. His hands shook as he broke the seal. Inside was a single page, written in Edward's familiar handwriting. Luke began to read. "My son, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't say goodbye the way I wanted to. But I need you to know, none of what happened was your fault. Life has strange ways of testing us, Luke. Sometimes the hardest lessons come through pain. I've made mistakes too, more than I can count. But when I look at you, I see every reason I ever tried to become a better man. You once asked me why I keep fixing broken things. I never told you the truth then, because it wasn't about the things. It was about us. Because fixing what's broken is how we learn to love again." Tears rolled down Luke's cheeks as he reached the end. He couldn't stop shaking. For years, he had hated himself for the fight they had before Edward left that night. He had replayed it 1,000 times in his head. Every cruel word, every silence. But now, for the first time, his father's voice cut through the noise. And it didn't sound angry. It sounded forgiving. Luke fell to his knees, clutching the letter to his chest. He sobbed, not like a man, but like a boy who had finally been allowed to cry after holding it in too. Outside the window, a soft wind began to blow. The curtains swayed gently, and for a brief second, Luke smelled it. That same familiar scent of Edward's cologne. He froze. Slowly, he lifted his head. The room was empty, but it didn't feel empty. There was warmth, a presence. And then, very faintly, he heard a whisper. "You fixed it, son." Luke's eyes filled again. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just smiled through his tears. A peace washed over him. Deep, calming, almost divine. The heaviness he had carried for years finally began to lift. Minutes later, Martha appeared at the door. When she saw him kneeling there, eyes red but calm, letter in hand, she didn't say anything. She just walked in and wrapped her arms around him. For the first time since Edward's death, mother and son held each other without words, and the silence between them was finally filled with love instead of regret. Outside, Michael stood near the gate, watching the two through the window. He smiled, not the smile of victory, but of peace. He whispered quietly, "It's done." Then he took a deep breath, looked at the sky, and said softly, "You can rest now, Edward." And with that, he turned and began walking down the misty road, disappearing into the fading evening light, as if he had never been there at all. End.